All right, let's go to the fourth and last game. And we'll send him by Song. I hope I'm saying that right. If you're watching right now, I hope you're watching right now. Hope you were able to make it. And let's begin. He was playing with the white pieces. And we see another King's Indian actually. And here you're saying, I don't know openings very much, so I thought about d5, but after knight e5, I thought black was fine. Yeah, knight c6 is a little bit odd. Black plays this too early. And indeed, you could go d5 here. And if knight e5, just take and keep developing. That would be quite possible. It's just another option that you have here. What you did is also fine. It will just transpose to the main line now, e5. Now we have transposed. Usually, black starts with e5 and then goes knight c6. d5, and now knight b4 is quite odd. The knight usually retreats to e7. And here you're saying, here I thought about some moves. I thought about attacking the knight with queen b3 or queen a4, but you didn't like a4. So that's a good thought process, that wouldn't really help and the queen would be not in the right place. And then you're saying you thought about a3 and b4, so you can control the c5 square, but then you didn't play it for some reason that you don't know. And I don't know either, because that would be absolutely the way to go. a3, play b4, the knight on a6 looks stupid. You're preparing the standard way to play here, going c5. So this is just a great version for white of the King's Indian. So that's the way to go. You played h3 to stop knight g4. But it's the wrong side of the board to play on anyways. I mean, h3 makes sense to put the bishop on e3 without being harassed with knight g4. But yeah, I mean, this other plan, a3, just play on the queen side, focus on that. Focus on that. Rook e8, again now a3 followed by b4, same story, bishop g5, a5, queen d2. And now your opponent just plays an insane move. I'm not sure what in the world was going on there. Plays bishop takes h3. I have absolutely no clue. So we'll just keep going. I mean, we're analyzing it for you anyway, so we're not worrying about your opponent's moves. Takes, knight a6. Now a3. Well, now it's a different story, right? You can play a3, yes, but you have already, you're up a piece. So you don't need to worry that much about creating play on the queen side right now. A plan that I really like here is bringing the bishop to g2. And of course there are many ways to do it. Maybe you could play rook f1, bishop f1, bishop g2, or you could play knight e1, go bishop f3, bishop g2, bring the knight to d3, where you can also exchange the knight on c5 and just go from there. And just exchange pieces. And you have all the time in the world. You're up a piece, right? There's nothing you need to do right now. So now this a3 plan seems not to be in the right time. Queen d7, king g2, just a minor thing. For me, it feels a little bit more natural to put a king h2, just intuition, gut feeling, just in case. Some lines, maybe the g file would be relevant. I don't know, just my gut feeling. Okay, king g2, knight c5, and here you're saying you completely missed this possibility of knight b3. And you're saying, I thought I'm a piece up so I can give up my dark square bishop and not worry about the pawn e4. Okay. Still, if you're a piece up, keep your bishops, right? You guys probably already know I'm a huge fan of bishops, and unless there's a reason to give it up, just don't, okay? Just don't. Don't give it up. Just defend the pawn on e4, and you could have defended both threats, pawn on e4 and knight b3 with queen c2, like you're saying yourself. And you're good. You're winning, obviously. You're up a piece. So that's the takeaway here. Don't give up your bishop. Especially also because you'll be weaker on the dark squares. Your opponent will have a dark square bishop, and you won't. So it's not necessary to do that. And now, yes, you're missing this knight b3 idea. Still, you could play queen c2 or any other move that defends against this threat. But it was just not on your radar, okay? b4. So I guess what could you do to avoid this in the future? Just ask yourself again, what I said earlier, what does my opponent want to do next? Is my opponent threatening anything? That's the first question to address. Is my opponent threatening anything? Do I have to react to this threat? And if there's no threat, then you can think about your own plans and how you're going to improve your position. But if there's a threat, you want to see, okay, can I defend against the threat and at the same time improve my position? Right? So that's my advice I would give here. Just prompt your mind in the right direction with the right questions. Knight b3, queen b2, takes, rook takes. Well, that's very natural. Here though, you could have kept the position close by playing b5. The knight is not going anywhere anyway, and you can take it back next move. And why should you keep the position close? Well, you see, you have two minor pieces, and your opponent has a rook for them. And rooks love open files. If they don't have open files, they don't have anything to do. So by playing b5, you keep the a file closed, and the black rooks won't get into action. So just an interesting alternative here. And also comes back to look for alternatives and don't play anything automatic. That's what I see a lot in players starting out, is that if your opponent takes something, they just take back immediately. And 90% of the time, that's completely correct, and that's what you should do. Your opponent takes one of your pieces, you take back. But sometimes there are intermediate moves or other options, and you want to keep your eyes open for these moves. Rook takes, a takes b4, and now queen takes b4. I understand that you want to keep the a file closed. On the other hand, your pawn structure gets worse. So maybe just take with the a pawn. And keep your pawn structure intact. I think that just feels more natural for me. Alright, queen takes b4, b6. And now what you did, I really, really like. I really, really like. Bishop d1, that's perfect. The bishop on e2 is not too active, and you bring it with tempo to better squares. Bishop a4, that's a grandmaster maneuver right there. That's how you do it. You realize, okay, my opponent isn't doing anything. How can I improve my position? Bishop on e2, bring it to c6, so much better. Okay, great. Rook a5. But now, bishop b5, your bishop is perfect on c6. And you're saying, I'm trying to use some light square weakness on queenside to my advantage, but I do not know how. I'm trying to put my knight on c6, but maybe I should have just put on b5. And the opponent's rook's move, I knew that this rook will be really active on c5, but I didn't want to put my knight on b5 because the bishop would be stuck on c6. Okay, so a couple of things here. The rook on c5 is not active. It will be just stuck, right? If black ever goes rook c5, you play bishop b5, this rook will not move again in this game unless it's sacrificing itself. So this is not possible for black. So be sure about what your opponent's options are. Your bishop is perfect on c6, covering a8. This rook is not going anywhere. This bishop is worth more than the rook right now. The rook is pretty much stuck here. And with your plan of bringing the knight to c6, takes a long time, and the question is, how much is it really worth it? The bishop is already perfect on c6. And we see this in a game where you actually managed to bring the knight to c6. It didn't really help you. So you need to ask yourself, where is my opponent going to play? And the only thing your opponent can really do, if he is going to do anything, is he will play with f5. So you want to be ready for that, okay? And here on the queen side, you're controlling everything. So you want to get ready for black to go f5, and maybe you could think about bringing the king over here. Something like that. Maybe bring the king all the way over here. You have time. Of course, you have to prepare it in some way. Maybe bring the queen back. But keep an eye on this f5 move, because that's really the only way black can create any counterplay. Because like I said, if rook c5, it's a lot of errors here, I notice right now. If rook c5, you just go bishop b5. Done. Okay? So I think some fundamental things here, that you just picked the wrong plans in the future and didn't really have a feeling for danger maybe as well. Because what we'll see here is that you're bringing too many pieces away from your king, and that's really hurting you in the end. Now this plan, it looks great, knight a2, knight b4, knight c6, but the knight on c6, it's not doing too much. It's needed elsewhere. So the bishop was perfect on c6, and here you could just play back, for example, and not the knight. Queen f8, knight b4, bishop h6, queen d3, rook a8. Okay, again, bishop c6. Not letting this rook off the hook, not letting him out from the a file. And then actually bring the knight back. I know that looks very stupid, but the knight was just, it's not doing much on c6. So queen c2. Yeah, also I'm kind of struggling to see what you want to achieve with some of your moves. Like, for example, this move, I'm not sure what you want to do here. Okay, I'm sorry. You're saying, I play queen c2 so I can bring my bishop back to the king side to guard my king. I'm not using my f3 knight at all other than guarding h4 and g5. How can I evaluate the current position? Who's better and why? What kind of plan should I make? Okay, we kind of talked about this already. The bishop is doing a good job here if you put on c6 because it is taking this rook out of the game completely. The rook is not going anywhere. You can play a4, then you don't have to worry about this pawn anymore as well, and just keep the bishop here because that's a nice trade. The bishop is controlling the rook, and that's, you know, it's fine. And then this knight, you need to bring it back. You need to bring the knight back to defend and not the bishop. So if you can defend, you should be fine. And probably better. But you need to be ready for this f5 and the counterplay along the f file. With this move queen c2, you see, even if you play bishop a4, you will still need much longer to bring your bishop back. It just takes so much time. Bishop a4, bishop b3, what then? To get it back to e2 takes forever. You had the right plan here, so stick to it. Stick to it. Having the bishop on c6 was the perfect square. At least as long as the rook is on the a file, because then, like I said, it's an exchange. The bishop is taking out the rook out of the game. Alright, f5, knight c6, rook e8. Now you see you have the knight on the square you want him to, but it's not doing anything. That's the problem. It's just looking pretty, and that's just not enough. And yeah, here also, it just seems you and your opponent are moving back and forth a lot. Not sure exactly what to say here. It seems you're a little bit clueless where to put your pieces. Now I think rook b3 it's a good place to defend a little bit. Do you bring the knight back finally? And I want to get to the next critical moment, which is here. So here you could just take on f5, and if black takes back, it has helped you already because a lot of the pressure is coming from the f file. Since you don't have a defender on g2 anymore covering the knight, so the knight is kind of loose. And if the f file is closed, then it's not that bad anymore. You can play bishop e6 here, you can maybe take with the queen on f5, and a lot of pressure has been lifted off your position already, even though it still remains complicated. Maybe went rook a3, rook gd8, bishop e6, and here again, e takes f5. Need to close that f file, because otherwise there will be so much pressure on this knight on f3. Knight c6, bishop f4, again e takes f5, knight b4, bishop c1, some tactics, and here you play rook c3. I think you could have just taken this bishop. f takes e4, and now go bishop g4. And you should be okay. Still remains unclear. Still you have a weak king and weak pawns, but I think that was definitely better than what happened in the game. So it's just a matter of, well, just checking. What is my opponent doing? Is he bluffing or not? And can I just take it and then defend? Rook c3, bishop h6. And now I think it was the last chance to take on f5, to have that f5 closed. If black goes e4 now, you can go knight d2. Not take on e4 because the rook on c3 would be hanging, but knight d2. And still fighting, and still very much unclear, I think. But now after knight c6, eventually, finally, black takes on e4, what he could have done a number of times beforehand, and rook takes a4. And the rook comes into a game, and your knight is out of the game on c6, and it's just too many pieces attacking you. So now queen g4, you're losing here anyway, but you still want to defend as tedious as possible, and king g2 would have been the most tedious defense. Because after queen g4, e4 is just a double attack, right? On the rook and on the knight, and that's it. So we'll see the last moves quickly, and here you resigned. So you're saying, how can I improve? So there's a lot to take away from this game, obviously. And you see I'm kind of struggling to summarize it all. I think the biggest takeaway is, where is the play going to be? Where do my pieces need to be? Because what went wrong was that you tried so hard to get your knight to c6 and then just didn't do anything there. Instead, being ready, anticipating f5 by black would have completely changed everything. If you just prepare with all you have for f5, because that's the only kind of counterplay that black can create, then you won't have any problems and you probably have very good winning chance. Of course, beforehand, there was this point where you lost the exchange, knight b3. That's a one-time blunder, can happen any time, right? That's something you can work on by doing tactics, doing a lot of exercise. The other thing, what then went wrong, was more of a positional kind of misunderstanding with where the piece need to belong. The bishop was perfect on c6, leaving the rook out of the game. The knight was also doing a good job on c3, because whenever f5 comes and if black takes on e4, then the knight can take back on e4, and the knight is just perfectly placed on e4. So I think this is the biggest takeaway, to realize what is my opponent, where's my opponent going to play, and how can I be ready for that. I mean, again, also later, when you had multiple times the chance to close the f-file, kind of close the f-file by taking on f5, and then not having to deal with the pressure on the f3 knight anymore. That was another kind of pointer. You, I guess, did not really realize how strong the pressure could be on the f-file, and that you don't want to allow that. Okay. So in that regard, I would recommend you to check out Mastering Chess Strategy by Johan Halsten. It's a very good book on playing sound position.